Well, I think that it showed that women really focus on the community, feeding the community, and that success doesn't necessarily look like how many acres they're farming or what their yields are, but are their communities fed? Um, I feel like they choose sustainability over scale. Something, keeping their operations smaller so that they can keep them sustainable. Um, I saw a lot of collaboration over competition. Um, and I saw, just like you said, and I see this everywhere with every type of farmer, just the pure, it's almost like as if the soil is in their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
They can't imagine doing anything else.
An award-winning documentary project that chronicles the rise of women working in agriculture around the world. From in-depth stories about and personal essays, photographic portraits, a podcast, and actively working to pass legislation. I want to stress that, actively working to pass legislation. In other words, she's getting things done on that level too, on behalf of farmers and farm workers. The project gives a powerful voice to the fastest growing demographic in agriculture, the female farmer. Women's work is currently available on PBS stations and will air again this fall to coincide with both National Farmers Day and the International Day of Rural Women. Audra's film is particularly timely as the United Nations has designated 2026 as the International Year of Women Farmers. Before Audra joins us, we want to share a clip.
100 miles south of Ramona Farms, near Tucson, members of the Thana Otham Nation are farming cooperatively. At San Javier Co-op Farm, tribal members grow traditional foods and teach wild harvesting to the next generation.
Keep in mind that we need to grow farmers. So we created internships, 2-year internships, and I saw that it really worked. And I say that because a lot of those young people, it changed their lives, by giving them a sense of purpose, a role that had at the time been, I don't want to say forgotten, it just changed, with our history. Kids are going to school, they're, going straight into a different kind of workforce, that agricultural or that means of living or that way of living just had changed. So we wanted to bring it back.
I think they enjoy the work, they enjoy the outdoors, probably because their grandparents did it. The whole community helped out when it was planting time, harvesting time. And that's what we try to instill with the community now, to come out and help.
It keeps us autumn, I would say. It keeps us remembering not only the ways of harvesting and paying attention and having an intimate relationship with the land, but also our stories and our songs. We see a really bright future ahead for us, and it's all based on our food.
It's so precious because land is something that you can live on, you can thrive on, no matter what you put on it. Having your feet in the ground and walking through the plants, it energizes you. You forget the negative energy that is around in the world. And it's a healing thing.
Well, that's a wow moment, isn't it? There's no question about that. I want to make sure, and Audra, welcome to the Rural Progress Summit. I want to make sure she gets the opportunity to give any opening remarks that you want. So, Audra, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Joel. So good to see you, and thank you for having me back. I got chills just watching that clip, and I think I've seen it 1,000 times. It's really such a privilege to be able to help bring these stories to the communities out there that they may know them, but they haven't heard them sort of on the scale that we're trying to do that. To have these stories on a national platform is just going to be incredible. So, like you mentioned, we're going to be on PBS this fall nationwide. And sorry, I'm just so excited about it. As far as I think what I'd like to start with, I think the film really was a way for me to start to answer the question of why women were erased from the agricultural narrative, despite all of their contributions. And so I pursued that over sort of the last 13 years of trying to figure out what that is. Why were they disappeared from this narrative and from history? And we were able to sort of achieve that in the film. It's very exciting.
Well, I think it's exciting for everyone. Audra, before any of this started, folks, I mentioned to Audra that I grew up the son of a very independent mother, somebody who wasn't going to take crap from anybody. Then I had 5 sisters. Then I married a woman that was very much like my mother, had 2 daughters and now 5 granddaughters. So it isn't just fear I live under, Audra, of very independent women, but it's the fact that I want them to succeed at whatever they choose in life. In your particular case, it's agriculture, and you're showing that story. I mean, it really is. What surprised you the most when you went out there and just talked to people like you did there? What surprised you the most?
Well, it's interesting because in the film, the youngest of our farmers is, somewhere in her 20s, and then our oldest farmer was 104. So it was a really great way to tell a complete story of what it looks like for a woman in agriculture from the beginning to the end. But I think what surprised me the most, and still does to this day, is that agriculture is the most unequal profession, one of the most gender unequal professions in the United States.
Why?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think women have been sort of locked out of financing and access to land and education through different policies that harmed them throughout the years and decades. Representation didn't exist for them. The education didn't exist for them. These women were not inheriting the land. The sons were. And so for women who wanted to farm, you had to marry a farmer. And that's all, changing for sure now. Women have access. They're inheriting the land now. They have access to financing, but not to the scale that men had and have.
I want to speak to it from a male perspective in one sense, because you mentioned land. And in that clip of that beautiful documentary that you put together, one of those individuals said, growing farmers. And I thought that clip really stuck out to me. Growing farmers. And in the case of the farmers that I grew up around, the one thing that many fathers did was try to get that son to come home and farm. And I think there's less and less of that, which is why a number of the farms have gotten to be more and more per acre. But as less come back to farm, are you seeing more daughters get that opportunity to do it?
Sure. There are definitely women who are even coming back to these larger scale farms. When we think of women farmers, we think of these small 20-acre farms. But we are now seeing that they are being passed on to women. A friend of mine is farming, I think she's got 10,000 acres in Montana where she's growing wheat. But the disadvantage also is that women need support in a lot of ways that men don't. They need childcare support. 2/3 of women farmers have off-farm jobs for healthcare purposes. So while they are coming back to the farm, they need a lot of support.
You nailed it, though. Many of the people that I know, their wives work off farm because of healthcare. That's the biggest issue. They want insurance, and many of the guys that I grew up around and that are my friends will say they don't care how much revenue their wife may make as a school teacher, as a secretary, in any of those jobs that they may not want versus running that farm. But they want her health insurance. And so for that to show up in your documentary, I have to tell you, it doesn't surprise me, but I think the rest of the world needs to see it and hear it. So I'm really glad you did that.
Yeah, I'm very excited for people to see these stories. I think these stories will sort of begin to shift sort of this mythology of what success looks like for farming.
What about the sheer love of it? What about the fact that you're growing something, with your hands? It might be with equipment, but you're seeing it grow. And in the case of women, that's been their focus in so many ways in their lives. And so to be able to use that in the role of farming, which they want to do.
They always have done.
Yeah, exactly. They always have done. I mean, what did your documentary show when it comes to that? That doesn't surprise me. In fact, I think the relationship to it is just as strong, if not stronger, when it comes to women. I truly believe that they don't look at it just as a tool, just as something like a piece of machinery to get it done. I think that they look at it and they treat it in a very, very strong way. And I think your clip just showed some of that. I really do.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the documentary and how you got to there, because there's a lot of time went into this. There's a lot of effort went into this, and I have no doubt there's a lot of money went into this. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about how you were able to achieve that.
Well, you at the beginning you gave me this real beautiful welcome, and it's funny because none of those things I did before I started thinking about women in agriculture. So I became a photographer and all of those things in order to help tell this story of women in agriculture. And so I had never made a film before. This is my first film. And I knew from the very beginning that I needed to tell this story in this format, that I didn't think people were going to go to the store and buy books about farmers. And just like when we struggled to place the farmer suicide piece in 2017, I struggled to fund this. In 2018, we did a crowdfunding campaign, and we got enough money that we could do a little bit of filming, and we had a little sizzle reel that we could show it around. And I just found it very, very difficult to find folks who wanted to fund storytelling about farmers. And eventually 2 organizations did step up. They found me, which was wonderful. None of the letters or requests that I sent out netted anything, but these 2 folks found us, and they helped us get over the finish line. But that was, I call us a micro budget. Most of the people that worked on this film volunteered their time and energy. So in 2019, we started filming, and we got that sizzle reel together, and then 2020 hit. And we didn't get back to filming until 2022. We finished the film in 2023 and had it out, and we broadcast it in Washington State and Georgia in 2024. And then American Public Television picked it up as the distributor, and it will broadcast nationwide this fall.
Well, even somebody as electronically deficient as what I am, I'll make sure that I get it, that I record it. There's an old term, and that I'm able to make sure everybody I know sees it.
Thank you.
You mentioned 2020, and we all know what happened there. We all know how the world went on hold. But it's a while since 19 to 25. I mean, it is. You strike me as somebody who's made friends along the way doing this, who has people that you want to succeed. Have you gone back and checked with them? Have you seen what progress they've made since then?
Well, it's exciting, the Indigenous story. So there's about 5 chapters in this film, and the Indigenous chapter, they are doing some fantastic things with their foods. They're growing a bean that they thought was lost and was found in a jar in a chest in one of the adobe homes that one of the women grew up in. And she was so thrilled because they really did think this desert adapted bean was lost forever. And now she's growing it at scale on 4,000 acres. All of the elders in the community gave her their land to farm. And so she's farming, spots all over the community and growing this bean. And it's, this terrific bean that requires so little water, and it's low glycemic, and, it's, a food from their past that will help bring them into the future.
Plus, it reminds them, and it keeps the heritage of the past, which to me is just really cool. I want to remind people, feel free to bring those questions forward, those Q's and A's. That features at the bottom of the screen as we have this conversation. What about regions? What about the areas? You mentioned, let me give you my bias as a former state legislator, okay? One country looks at rural. We look at rural, the progress of rural. We don't just look at it in the area that I live, the north. We look at it and try to focus on what you just did with Indigenous people in certain parts of the country where they're not going to do that. Up here where I spend a lot of my winter ice fishing, I realize that, I understand it. But when you look at all of that, and you go forth, and in your bio, I read your efforts to bring a chance to succeed, whether that's through legislation or whatnot. Here's my bias as a former legislator. That's an uphill climb. That's a really uphill climb, because to get these conservative states legislatures to advocate and give women a chance to do what you hope they get a chance to do, that's a hard push. And I'm trying to find out if you found it the same way as what I assume it to be.
Yes, I think, my first sort of foray into legislation began with the farmer suicide piece that we published in 2017, and Senator Heitkamp helped us get the word out, and that ultimately led to its own legislation and funding in the Farm Bill. But then I've carried on hoping to help women, achieve what men have been able to achieve. And that's very, very difficult since they don't have the same access. So by doing, there's, you have seen, sorry, gosh, I can't remember the name of the recent bill, but they passed a bill that allowed women to reapply for the loans that they were rejected for, because they felt that so many women farmers and farmers of color had been rejected for funding from the USDA. And that has been held up in courts. So there has been some challenges there. I didn't have a direct hand in that one, but I was so happy to see that come through, and I'm hoping that can make its way through the courts, and that some of the women can get those loans. I think by supporting, and I mentioned earlier, the childcare and healthcare, those are two types of barriers that we can remove. And I think I don't know why we wouldn't want to, help provide quality childcare and healthcare in rural communities.
It just feels as though we've gone backwards on that. That's my political bias on the big ugly bill. I've decided that that's what I'm going to call it until I'm blue in the face. Two things I want you folks to remember as we have this conversation: the Female Farmer Project, of course, women's work, which you're looking in front of you, which should be required. I think that that needs to be in every school, for example, as well as every person's go ahead and sit down, grab a cup of coffee or whatever you want. In my case, it'd be a beer, and watch it, because I think you owe it to yourself to do that. You know, to go out and to get people to let you do the story. You know, farmers are very private people. If you show up with a camera, their attitude is, I'm going the other way. I mean, how were you able to pull this off?
It's true. So many of them couldn't figure out why I would want to take a photograph of them to begin with. I'm just farming. You know, it's not that exciting, but there was a true lack of women at work. You know, anytime I did any kind of image search at the very beginning, if you ask for farmers, if you ask for women farmers, often it was just, you know, people with clean hands. You know, there wasn't true agricultural photography happening. And so I set out to do that. And it's interesting that you talk about the relationships, you know, some of these relationships are built over years, you know, one of them over a decade before I could get permission to come and film with them and share their stories, for them to trust me enough to do their stories justice.
A couple of questions come into our chat room. I'm sorry, Audra. It says, how do you think that the government, state, local, or federal, could assist in increasing access to farmland, financing, everything that's required?
Well, if we begin funding programs and grants that are aimed at first-time and first-generation farmers, I think we will sweep up women, farmers of color, those who, you know, are the first generation. They don't have that land, and land is very, very expensive right now. And many of them have to farm close to city centers, which makes the land even more expensive because they are selling direct to the community through farmers markets or directly to the chefs, you know, coming to the back door of the restaurants. You know, much of their, you know, they're not having the truck load up on the farm and, you know, send out all of their product. They don't have that large of operations.
Let me ask you this. So, through our chat room, what moment during your production was the most impactful to you? In other words, to me, what that question means is when I'm sitting there watching this documentary, when I'm sitting watching your work, which one do I not want my wife to look at me because I'll end up getting sentimental?
For each woman that you meet, you fall in love with her. And you don't want her story to end, and then we have to move on. And it's a little heartbreaking for that because you want to learn more. But I think the one that is the gut punch is when one of our experts, she wasn't even one of our farmers, one of our experts shared a story about her father losing the ranch during the farm crisis in the 80s. And that how he had to make money afterwards. And what that looked like for her as a child may have been fun, but as a young adult, when she learned what everybody was going through during that time, that was what made her become a sociologist.
I want to know.
I won't share the story because it really is more impactful in her words. But
I don't want you to now. I'm not going to lie to you. I want to see it. It's like reading the last one of the last chapters of the book. What about labor? Because you and I both know one of the struggles that women have is being the boss. Even though I've worked for a number of women as my boss, as my managers, and found them to be incredibly easy to work for as long as I work. And that's one of the important things for me to remember. So let me ask you this: for a woman farmer, is it harder to find workers? Are they less apt to come work for them?
I don't think so. I think, and in fact, I think a lot of young people want to work for women farmers. They want to learn from them. They want to know what they know. And, women tend to be more collaborative. And so when these young people come work on these farms, they feel like they are part of something, that they are part of a greater good. And that's
Okay.
exciting and interesting to people. And I think that's how we get young folks to farm, how we grow young farmers, is that they need to have a stake in what's happening, whether it's the environment or whether it's feeding communities or whether it's, the well-being of communities, less poverty in communities. That's how we can incentivize them, is by showing them that all those things are possible through farming.
You mentioned land. If you're going to, and farmers markets, those type of things, you can, in a small area, in a small acreage, you can raise a crop that you can live off of. You go to that farmer's market, it's high value, it's what people want, it's the very food that they want to eat. But I want to talk about production agriculture. I want to talk about raising the type of soybeans or corn or edible beans or peanuts or whatever. But acreage matters with that. The type of equipment that you're going to need to harvest, you're going to have to justify by using a lot of acres. How do women break through that barrier? Because you mentioned that land is hard for them to access. And so in my backyard here, when I see somebody driving on the road with a pickup and I see a woman doing that, driving up to the combine, how did they get to there?
The only way I know of right now is to inherit it. And that's, that has to be a decision in the families. They need to start seeing the women as viable, operators that can take over the family operation. They can be the fifth and sixth generations on these farms. It's a changing of the representation. I think that we need to change our minds about who can grow our food.
Yeah.
And this film really reminds you of that women were the first farmers here. And that it wasn't until the rise of the plow that women were, not farming. They, moved to the inside work. The outside work was too laborious.
What about the role that women play on the traditional farm? Because I know a lot of men that are the head of farms that quietly the woman is the head of the farm. That they have a major influence when it comes to the decisions made on that farm. What about that? What about what you found in regards to that may be the leader, but it's a very quiet leader?
Right, that soft power. I think one of the things that we can start doing is stop calling them the farmer's wife and start calling them the farmer, because they really are, even if they're not in the fields every day, they are a farmer. And I think by changing our language around who we call a farmer is a great first step.
Yeah. A question comes into our chat room, says, what do you think will be the effects of the closing of rural hospitals and the loss of women's healthcare access?
I think that's going to affect everyone in such significant ways. One of the things that we found, even with our farmer suicide work, is that rural hospitals were so key in identifying when farmers were starting to go down the path of depression. And we're finding now that women are now also suffering depression and dying by suicide in rural communities, in farms. So I think the effect is going to be awful, awful, awful. We really need to fight for those rural. They just were able to get those built, I'd say, in the last 15 years, many of them. during the Obama administration, and to lose, I live in a rural community myself, and to get to a doctor, we have some here, but they're often booked out months and months and months in advance. And if you need help now, that's really hard. You have to drive an hour, 2 hours to get to a doctor.
Want to ask a little bit, if I can, about, failure. What happened? Because every farmer can fail, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whatever. But the price that women pay for failing or not succeeding, let's put it that, for their goals, their ambitions, the price that they pay, it would seem to me, as a guess, would be harder than what it would be for men, less acceptable, easier to criticize, those type of things. What did you find out there?
Well, I think that, it's women, first of all, they define success differently. But for the women, if there is a failure in losing the farm, that type of thing, the fear of, people using that as an example of why women shouldn't be farming is, probably a real fear. But if success doesn't look like how many rows you're growing or how many acres or what your yield is, then, who's to say whether you're succeeding or failing?
You said they define success differently, though. In what way? What did you mean by that?
I think that women define success based off of their community, the success in their community being fed. It's not a numbers thing for them as far as acreage. I remember, one of the farmers here, she grows on 4,000 acres, and another one grows on less than an acre. And they're both successful because they're both feeding their communities. It just doesn't, I just have found that it doesn't look the same. And we have found, I have sort of suspected that as a qualitative observation over the years, but now we're actually starting to see that quantitatively. And like I mentioned earlier, that Penn State released a study that said that they can quantitatively prove that communities that have women-led operations, a significant, I don't know what the tipping point is of that significant number specifically, but they have better outcomes. They have better health outcomes. They have less poverty rates or lower poverty rates. There's just a better community well-being.
What about their personalities? Because some of the hardest guys to communicate with, some of the toughest, I'm going to use that word, some of the toughest guys I know are out there bailing and raising cattle and getting up in the morning, those type of things. What about the personalities of the women that you studied?
Yeah, they're tough too. It's interesting. You asked about stories. The first farmer and the last farmer that we talked to, their mothers were the farmers, but they were both of their mothers were blind. And so they would tell the story about coming home and telling them what they did. And the mother would tell them what they need to do the next day and describe what she needed to, go find the next day, describe, so it was very interesting that we had two women farmers whose mothers were blind that helped them learn to farm just by describing what they were doing. So that to me is tough. That's the resilience of women. They're not just growing and raising food, but they're, growing and raising their children as well. Gosh, there is such an opportunity there for scholarships for first generation farmers, for young women. It's a peerless opportunity right now. There's no scholarships that I can find that are specifically for women or for first generation farmers. I think that's an opportunity for private businesses that you know, gosh, what an opportunity to, put women on the road to success and build these on-ramps for young women to start farming.
There's another factor in this. I drive 130 miles every day, 65 miles up, 65 miles back, because I love living in my rural area, to go to Fargo, to go to work. And I have to tell you, every time I drive up, I see less people. And I'm not talking about on the road as much as what I'm seeing neighbors that have dropped out of production agriculture, that have chosen not to do that. In fact, my best friend, one of his sons is an engineer and one of his sons is a dentist, and they never once thought about farming. They never wanted that life. The life was too long for them in terms of being able to golf on Friday, for lack of a better way of putting it. So what about that? What about the dedication to be able to make that lifetime commitment to what can be the hardest job in the world?
Yeah, I think we might be seeing what we saw in the 80s with, the farms having to, you know, uh, go big. And they did. And that meant fewer people to support the township. And so you saw sort of a cratering of rural America with fewer people living there. Um, I have a friend who says, school buses and church pews, that's what we need to fill in rural communities. And that's very difficult when there isn't enough work out there. I think a big part of that as well, this might be just taking a left, right turn, but I think once we have fiber throughout the United States, it will be so much easier for people to live in rural communities. The lack of access to internet connectivity for these communities is terrible. They don't get the news. They don't. They can't run a business. So, yeah, I think we're seeing that again. Fewer and fewer people. Farms having to get larger. I think I forgot the second part of your question. No.
Well, I mean, in a way, you nailed it, because broadband makes it so that you can, you can hold multiple jobs. You can. You can be a successful farmer while at the same time being in your home running some other business. Those two things can happen. In my time, I've seen tractors go to where you don't even need to be in them. And that's happening. Right. And it's semis, the same thing. So all day long, that's how long I could talk about this. But where are people and when are people going to be able to find your documentary?
American Public Television is announcing it this summer, and they are asking national stations to broadcast it for National Farmers Day, which I believe is October 6th, somewhere in there. My apologies if I'm wrong. And then International Rural Women's Day is further on in the month. But those are the two dates that they are hoping to target for this fall for national broadcast.
Audra, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for joining us at the Rural Progress Summit. Your work to expand the awareness of the role of women in agriculture is it's vital. It's timely. And now I want to thank all of you for joining us. So Audra, thanks. Appreciate it.